Hi, everyone. We'll be getting started shortly, so just hang in there. We're going to start right at 12 o'clock. So a few more minutes. Okay, well, it's 12 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Thank you all for joining us. This is for the second installment of the State Historical Records Advisory Board's Community Archiving webinar series, Digitization Station for Patrons. We have a robust panel of librarians currently engaged in digitization station projects today. So please go ahead, and if you have questions while we're doing this presentation, go ahead and pop them in the chat, and we will address questions at the end of the presentations. My name is Karen Feeney, and I am the North Carolina Collection Supervisor for the North Carolina room at the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Public Library. I've been a certified archivist since 2016, and I've served on the State Historic Records Advisory Board since 2019. This year I got to be a traveling archivist for the first time, which is very exciting. I love to go out into the community and help people and organizations organize their archives and preserve their history. In my personal time, I'm a cat foster and I love working on genealogy. So just a little bit about me. If I can get this presentation to start. Okay, so here at the Forsyth County Public Library, we got started with our digitization stations in 2009. We did a grant with Winston-Salem State University, Wake Forest University, Old Salem Museum and Gardens, and our library to start the digital Forsyth photograph library. That's a static site. It's been a static site since it was created. But we originally had 4 digitization stations in our system. There was one at the Central Library in the North Carolina room. There was one at our African American branch, our Lloyd Jordan East Winston Heritage Center. There was one at Walkertown, at our Walkertown branch, and one at our Louisville branch. And those worked very well until the software kind of aged out and some of the scanners had issues. So for a little while there, while we were transitioning, when we closed Central Library in 2014 and reopened in 2017, we didn't really have digitization stations there for a while. It took us a while to figure out how to get new software and some new equipment to reopen our digitization stations. And I wasn't part of the decision-making process, but we now only have 2 stations. And they are located at our Louisville branch library and our Walkertown branch library. And they have both Louisville and Walkertown have very active historical associations. Louisville's Historical Society does, they have records from, they're basically vertical files in their library that they let patrons access. And it's a lot of clippings from the Louisville and Clemens newspaper and other things from around the town. And then Walkertown has the Walkertown Area Historical Society, and they do programming in the library. So they've already had very active use of their digitization stations. Both stations have the same equipment and the same capabilities. They have the tape to PC equipment. They have a VHS recorder that will record to digital. They have a Nikon slide scanner, sorry, and an Epson scanner for photographs and documents. The photographs, they can do scan slides and negatives. They can do negatives on the Epson scanner. They've got the plastic trays that you can put the little slides into if you have like the longer film slides, or if you have just like small clips of film. And they use the Epson scan software for that. And then for the Nikon scanner, they use a ViewScan software for that. So they can convert CDs to digital format. The CDs, they can also import music into iTunes. They can convert cassette tapes to digital format, and they can convert DVD or VHS to video files. And they can save those in the cloud, or they can burn them to a disk. So for the tape converter, and they don't, unfortunately, I guess they can do records on that with that software, but they don't have a record player to convert, but they can do cassette tapes. And they use the Easy Vinyl Tape Converter. And then for videos, they use the Roxio Easy VHS to DVD converter. And that takes the video. You have to be there in real time playing the VHS for it to convert over to DVD. So in our 2 stations, patrons can make an appointment to use it over the phone, or they can do it in person at the branch. They get specific training when they come in on how to use the equipment, whether they're doing a photograph scan, or if they're doing slide scans, or they're converting VHS. They'll get specific training on that. They have a lot of repeat patrons who get training. Once they're trained on it, they can just schedule the room and just come and use it. There's 1 or 2 staff members at each branch who can do the training. And just some advice on using your space, using your equipment. We, in the old Central, before we closed, we had, North Carolina room had the digitization station. And when we opened, and we had a pretty good group of people that would come and use it in there, because everyone in the room knew how to use the equipment. But when we opened New Central, it was put down in computer services area, because I thought that might be a better place for it to be. But a lot of people didn't use it down there. So just be careful when you're using your digitization stations. Kind of, if you don't get a lot of use in one location, maybe move it to another location, because you might get more use at another location. Just kind of a thought for that. So, and now the next presentation is going to be from John Russell.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me and see me okay?
I can hear you.
Excellent. So I'm John Russell, Head of Adult Services at Hickory Public Library, and I have 19 years experience in public libraries, including as previous YS coordinator at Lincoln County in North Carolina, and then before 2020, I served various library systems in the Tampa Bay area. I worked to have the library be seen as exciting, engaging, and welcoming place for everyone, and endeavor to connect with people that I've never considered using the library before, and offer services to meet the needs of the whole community. I'm passionate about healing and connecting the power of wellness activities, games, the arts, and music in and outside of libraries. And on the next slide, there is a blog some 10 years ago, and that was for when I was involved in a digitization project in the Tampa Hillsborough County Library System for the Centennial. Um, I'm going to share a link to this blog. It was the Library History Roadshow, and patrons were invited to share their library memorabilia and have them scanned at a variety of locations. On the next slide, it will show um, the seal for the 1914 to 2014 range, and the West Tampa Library is a Carnegie Library, and this project went on for a few years in gathering those uh, uh, objects to be digitized. And on the next slide, it'll show the range of scope of this project. And I just wanted to share this roadshow format for those that are interested. The blog link is in the chat, and I think it documents the project well. I was the branch manager in 2014 at the C. Blythe Andrews Junior Public Library. And there's a couple more slides that show how this was brought into the digital collections of the library's website at the time and still currently available. And then there's one more that shows, in addition to patrons who brought in documents to scan as the roadshow hit each library, they also recorded video memories of the library. This was around the same time that we did a 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, and also gathered digital memories and memorabilia to scan with patrons and to archive of various residents around Tampa Bay that had traveled for the March on Washington at the time 50 years ago. Next slide, please. And currently in Hickory, we have a North Carolina room with a variety of microfilm, books, maps, and great resources. On the digital side of things, we have a wide variety of options for patrons to access our vertical files digitally. So we have many vertical files that patrons have contributed to, and if patrons bring in items, they can be scanned. So this shows some of the topics, including land grants, medical, military, public properties, sports, religion, and other popular categories for collecting patron contributions, and ones that the libraries have already collected. And we have a couple more slides showing some of the vertical files that patrons have worked on with staff. And here's some showing families. So within the A through Z, there are various family files with different photos and news clippings. And in the next one, it'll show a couple of residents celebrating achievements in 102 years birthday. And here we have some residents writing about specific times in Hickory where businesses were, fabric shops that were cut, and that these were all scanned at various times with patrons' involvement. And there's another one saying she was a well-known seamstress in the Hickory area and had worked on certain people's weddings. And on our next slide, I just wanted to give a shout out to the great work that Digital NC is doing. We've worked with them to have our yearbooks digitized. So for anyone that's not aware, they do a great job digitizing those. For high schools, there's a 50-year embargo based on the students being minors. So we just sent about close to 20 yearbooks last fall to get caught up on some donations we had received. And that's they're made available with no login for free at the Digital NC website, which I'll put in the chat. And there's a wide variety of resources available on there throughout all of North Carolina. On the next page, it shows some of the Hickory logs. So we've contributed 47 from our Hickory Public Library North Carolina room to be sent there to UNC Chapel Hill to be digitized, and then we received the books back. So I was a great partner to work with on those projects and glad to have those available. There's a question, about access to the digital vertical files. They are accessible in our Carolina room. Patrons can come in and access them, print, and take snippets or any portion they need to access here at the Hickory Public Library at the main branch, Patrick Beaver Memorial Library. And what's up on the screen right now is, I'll give a link to that product. This is the simple scan station that we had previously. I started here last summer, so I have some notes from our director, Sarah Green, who had shared some information about our scanning options prior to last summer. So prior to last summer, we had 2 touchscreen scanning stations that were launched in the spring of 2016, one to each of our 2 locations. Prior to that, we had no scanning services for the public. These were well received, and we liked that they had simple interfaces and were easy to use and self-service for patrons who did not have a lot of tech experience. We continued with the same machines until the software could not be updated in 2024, similar to what you had just heard prior in the first presentation. And after working with our IT department and vendor, we determined that the cost of replacing the machines was too high based on the usage, and that we could rely on our new Ricoh leased copier machines, which at this time had added scan to file capabilities for sending to email and USB drives. A note that if we had upgraded the scan stations, there was an option to add scan to fax, which would have been valuable to our patrons, but the cost for just that feature was not worth the could not be justified based on the whole product needing a complete upgrade, hardware and software. So on our next slide, we have our current Ricoh devices. We have them deployed through both of our libraries on both floors and each department, and every device can do scanning to, again, to an email or to a USB drive. They can be configured to scan to network drives also. They have various features which are on the next slide. So on this slide, you can see that you can choose your scanning in black and white, color. We've experimented with the options for glossy photo and some of the other settings and found that it's good to experiment with those based on what you're scanning, because you can get some improved results. On the next slide is the resolutions. This is important if you're archiving. 300 may be kind of the starting for archiving, but you could consult with others on recommendations and what needs there may be for higher dots per inch, and what how much larger the file size would be then. On the scan size, which is on the next slide, there's a variety of default sizes that can be selected. There's a question about staff time or patron training. These are on our photocopiers and printers, and we work with patrons. Many patrons, after being shown, a couple times on as far as what they need, are very are able to use them independently. And we've had good feedback from the ability to email these directly to their email on phone, and then they have them to save and email to others or add to their files. They could also send them to us if it was something that we were going to be archiving in our collections. But we've found that these are easy to use. One of the tricky parts is if you're scanning a lot of basic paper files, 8.5 by 11, you can put them in the document feeder, and those are very easy to click and scan. The RICO specs on the C3010 say that the 220 sheet single pass document feeder scans two-sided files at 300 images per minute. So that's if you've got a large, a large amount of paper to scan that's 8.5 by 11. If you're doing photos, you want to be considerate of the file type. So in the next slide, it'll show some of those options. And if you're doing photos, it'll ask you to choose the size, and it will not scan it until you choose if you want it to be 8.5 by 5.5 or 8.5 by 11. You can here change it from PDF, which would be good for a document, but TIFF and JPEG options will be good for photos that can be edited in Photoshop or any other sort of photo editing or archiving environment. There's a question about issues with scanning, taking up the copiers. In our reference area, the adult reference area on the second floor of our main library, we have 3 of these RICO devices in a very short area. We have one in our Carolina room, which is our history and genealogy room. We have one just outside, and then we have another just by the reference desk. So we do work to direct patrons to kind of the best fit, depending on how long they need, the best device to get set up at. We have another one down close to circulation, and another one in our youth services department, and then another device at our Ridgeview branch library, or other device options there. So we haven't run into any issues with these really tying up because there's a variety. Okay, so on the next page, I have a note of some future plans for using scanning and archiving and connecting to patrons, working on a scanning project and collective history genealogy project with collecting yearbooks. We've had a lot of good feedback from the yearbooks that we've collected. It's a popular part of our history and genealogy room, and I'm working on the initial parts of a plan to bring together students, alumni, to scan patrons' historical items and create new content to archive based around yearbooks. So we've got 100 years worth of yearbooks in our from a local high school, and we have local college and others collected, and I'm planning over the next few months to get those into a large meeting room outside of our Carolina room for a program where we'd have each decade on a table and work on ways to digitize some things that we could annotate with those yearbooks. So connect a year to some more information, and also connect generations, youth with their parents and grandparents together, bringing some of this history and memories alive. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with all of you today, and I look forward to reading more of the questions and staying after for the Q&A section. And we have another great panel coming up, and on the next slide, you'll have my contact information. So if any of the things I mentioned are things that you want to chat about more, please get in touch. And I should also mention, I'm going to put in the link to our Learning Lab, which is a great website that you can learn about the things that can be reserved there. And as mentioned in the first presentation, we do have a cassette to MP3 converter also as one of the reservable areas there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. Next up is going to be Joseph Westendorf. I'm going to get your slides up here right now. Okay.
Okay. Yes, I'm Joseph Westendorf, the head of the Local and State History Department for the Cumberland County Public Library. Our history department is located at the headquarters library in Fayetteville. And I've been working here for about 3.5 years, and I've been running the department for around 2 years. Next slide, please. In Cumberland County, we're right in the Sandhills region of the state, right next to Fort Liberty. Our memory lab, we call it a digital preservation lab, and it's here in Cumberland, and we're located on the second floor of the headquarters library, which is downtown. And our DPO lab was formed with an OSTA grant around 2015, and since then, in 2023, the library also gave us some extra money to update it. Next slide, please. So our setup is here we can do a lot. We have a VHS to DVD converter. We have a record converter. We recently got an 8mm film reel-to-reel converter, which a lot of people had been asking for. We can scan photos. We have a slide converter, and we even have a book scanner. The smaller items we keep in the office, and we only bring them out when they're being used because since they're small, there's always the concern, well, what if someone's not paying attention and someone walks away with it? But that's our DPO setup. Next slide, please. And since I've been here, we've had trouble with it due to two main factors. One, limited usage. We're on the second floor of the headquarters library, but we're kind of out of the way from the entrance to the building. So it was hard to get good usage at the DPO lab itself. There was talk about putting it downstairs and making it more visible, but that ended up not happening. And in hindsight, I think that was probably a good thing since I think the plan they had for it wouldn't have worked out that well. We've also had some issues with the equipment until last year when they gave us more money. The computer running the lab was becoming really slow and crashing constantly since it was from the original grant in 2015. So we would start helping patrons only for the computer to crash and we have to restart. And that was an inconvenience. Another issue we had was about 2.5 years ago when we bought our first book scanner. We had come into some funds unexpectedly, and my boss was like, let's buy a book scanner. So we had an ITS downloaded the software for it, and after using it for 3 weeks, they came back and said, this software has been flagged as ransomware. So they said, you can't use this anymore. And then they realized, well, we just wasted money on a book scanner. I think it was a Cruzar scanner, which comes from China, and for whatever reason, our IT department said that this has a virus connected to it, so you can't use it. And that was just a struggle with equipment that hasn't worked like it should, or even got flagged as having a virus. Next slide, please. And once I became head of the department, I started to do more to promote it. I wrote a couple newspaper articles that were published in local papers about it. We added this banner you can see here to the department to draw people to it. But like libraries do deal with, it was one of those things people would be like, oh wow, I never knew the library had this and it's free too. I'll check it out. And then they just wouldn't show up or they wouldn't end up coming by. So that helped draw views, but not as many as we would prefer. Next slide, please. So about last year, I was talking to a colleague and I'm like, we should really bring this out to the community. Instead of making people come to us, why don't we try to come to them? So a colleague of mine suggested that why don't we go to senior centers in town? Since he and I knew from observing the people who used our DPO lab that they tended to be older or people whose parents had just died and they were cleaning out stuff and they found old file formats. And that tracked for me since my grandfather had recently died and we had found 5,000 slides that he had from his time in the military. While since I'm a younger person, I have never used a slide for anything. So my colleagues set up appointments with senior centers. And so far, we've set up partnerships with 2 senior centers in the Cumberland County. And starting last month, we took it out to one of them. It took some effort getting everything together, but we took our DPO lab and made it mobile going to a senior center. Next slide, please. And last month was really successful. We had 20 people on our list and we could only help 10 of them. So we had to reschedule another 10 people for another time. And this is a picture here from the Bill Crisp Senior Center. I had 2 colleagues there and we were helping probably a good eight people in that picture. And our next visit to Bill Crisp Senior Center would be in March, and we're already booked for that too. There's another 10 people on that waiting list. So it's gone really well so far. And a lot of these people told us that we're not able to go downtown to the headquarters library, which is around a 25 to 30-minute drive from the senior center. So they were so happy that we actually took the stuff to them. And next week, we're going to another senior center, which is also outside of Fayetteville, to just bring this into the community and get people to use it. Next slide, please. So these are our statistics. As you can see, for fiscal year 2025, the last 2 months, January especially, when we took the visit, they've been higher. So we are happy and confident that the numbers will continue to rise. Since when it stays in the library, the numbers were only staying at maybe 5 to 10 uses a month, but we had 25 last month. We've already had a couple this month. We might get another 10 next week. So that has us very happy that we're actually using our DPO lab to meet our customers' needs where they're at. Next slide, please. The biggest thing we've probably learned is if there's only one type of converter to get for their memory lab, it's something that can convert VHS tapes, because the overwhelming majority of requests for our equipment has to do with VHS tapes. A bunch of people who were put on the wait list from the last senior center, they just wanted to use the VHS. They had old family videos, graduation videos, weddings on VHS that they wanted to convert over. And I would say that probably makes up 80% of our requests. The record converter that we have, I have never seen it used at all, which kind of makes sense since people who have records today are often collectors. So they actually want the records because they actually use them. I've never seen that used. And just prepare for equipment to crash. That happens sometimes, and just be prepared for that. And now I'll answer a couple questions that were asked. Someone asked, did you need any new equipment for the mobile option? We did not. The only thing we needed really to do was label all the cords and make sure we packed everything well. And we learned last month that we could have done a better job with that, because when we got to the senior center, it took a while to get stuff untangled. So we're going to do better this month, but we didn't need to get any new equipment. And for any kind of permissions and releases that we have to collect, we do have a form we have people sign, which just acknowledges that if they convert something incorrectly, we're not responsible. We do, if they're new to our software, we do walk them through it at first, but they sign a release saying that if they break our equipment, it's on them. So we do have a standard agreement they do sign for that. And I think that is it for me. Next slide, please. Yep, and if any of you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
All right.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Next up is Della Owens. Thanks, Della. I'll let you have it.
All right. So hello, everyone. I am Della Owens. I am the Reference Local History and Genealogy Librarian here at the Harnett County Main Library in Lillington. I've been working here for almost 4 years, and I received my MLIS from UNC Greensboro in 2017. Next slide, please. Let me just preface this for everyone. Everything I'm about to show you is a work in progress. My colleagues have shown you their wonderful digitization stations, their labs. Everything I'm doing, I am in the middle of. So I'm pretty close to where you guys are probably starting. So just keep that in mind. Next slide, please. When I began this adventure, I had 3 goals that I wanted to meet. I wanted to improve what the library already offered to the public. And I wanted to help our patrons preserve their personal histories that were in danger of being lost because they were locked in obsolete media. And I wanted to provide a way for our patrons to capture local stories and also to have those stories shared. Next slide, please. So I went out looking for funding, and very fortunately, my library was accepted into the Memory Lab network. The DC Public Library was accepting applications to train 3 cohorts worth of libraries on how to make their own memory labs. They ended up having 16 libraries across the country. And what they did was provide training, mentoring, financial support in order for each library to create their own memory lab, with the idea that once a memory lab was created in a state, then other libraries in that state could look to that library to gain guidance and ideas on how to make their own memory lab. Next slide. However, for you all listening here, I'm afraid that the Memory Lab Network, as far as joining and gaining funding and live training, they're not doing that anymore. However, they do have resources on their website where you can gain access to tutorials, webinars, handouts, all material that was made or used by the Memory Lab Network. So it's a really great resource, and I definitely recommend you guys check it out. If you guys end up making your own lab, you should also reach out to the DC Public Library to add that to their map. It contains locations that have personal digital archiving and digitization labs, which focus on digital materials, audiovisual materials. And this map is useful because if there is a patron who is looking for services, maybe they're Googling and they're finding places they have to go and pay for it. Perhaps they'll find the Memory Lab Network, find this map, and find you guys. Since 2022, this map has been viewed nearly 27,000 times. So just one more resource for you guys to be able to get your labs either you currently have or you're going to have out there and seen by the public. Next slide. So I wanted to improve what the library already had. So we have 2 copiers that have scanning capability. One is upstairs and one is downstairs. These are not dedicated scanners. They make physical copies too. And with our proximity to our courthouse, these scanners and copiers, they're very popular. And there's no way for our patrons to reserve these copiers. It's first come, first serve. So if someone is coming in with a big box of treasured history and the copiers are busy, or like last week when one of our copiers was broken, it's going to be a problem for them because they're not going to be able to reserve a space. And it's a problem for our regular patrons because if they just need to really quickly scan their ID because they need to go to the courthouse, it's going to cause a problem. So if you go to the next slide. Thank you. Again, fortunately, we were part of the Memory Lab Network and they sent us equipment. So they were able to send us an Epson 1300 XL archival quality scanner. And if you know about this scanner, it's very popular in university archives. However, for you guys, you might see that there's a $4,000 price tag on that. Will your patrons need this? Probably not. I would recommend spending your money a little bit more wisely because while this is a very large scanner, can accommodate larger items and can really give you some high resolution, it's not going to be something that every patron is going to need. It's going to create or has the capacity to create high quality scans, but the higher the quality scan, the more storage space it's going to take up and the harder it is to share that scanned item. And that's likely what your patrons want to do. They want to share their memories. If you have a really high quality, very large file, it's going to be hard to share that. And if you put it on Facebook, it's just going to compress it anyway. So I definitely recommend looking into scanners and seeing which one has a high enough PPI or pixels per inch setting to satisfy the needs of your patrons. If you're looking for resources to help you understand what you need, I recommend starting with the Library of Congress. They have 2 blog posts that were really helpful. And of course, the Library of Congress is always helpful. And of course, state archives. Ask them what they think that you guys might need. If you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to preserve personal histories that are trapped in obsolete media. Again, because I was very fortunate to be part of the Memory Lab network, we received a VHS deck, a cassette deck, and a DV cam deck. So these decks are going to be your playback devices. They have the analog signals, and the Blackmagic Ultra Studio HD Mini, that is the analog to digital converter. It is what is going to take that analog signal and turn it into a digital signal. You've probably also noticed the price tag on these items. Playback devices, if you go on, eBay, you can find them, but because it's been so long since people were able to just go in a store and buy a VHS deck, and people are trying to do analog to digital conversion, sometimes you're going to find them at a really expensive price. However, you can always get lucky. Like one of my colleagues mentioned, VHS is the most popular. So if you're going to get something other than a scanner, I definitely recommend getting VHS. And also I recommend talking to these other libraries on what they have. You might not need the Blackmagic Ultra Studio HD Mini. It's very pricey. You might need something that is cheaper or maybe even just easier to use. I had the privilege of going to see the digitization lab in Fayetteville at the Cumberland County Library, and they have an easier to use, I think, system, and it is cheaper. So definitely ask around because you don't necessarily need to spend all this money. Next slide, please. Speaking of money, there is going to be unforeseen costs with setting up a digitization lab. While I did receive equipment, I didn't receive all the necessary bits that I needed to, 1, make a memory lab work, and 2, make sure that my memory lab didn't walk away. For things like S-video cables, BNC adapters, those were small items, and I was able to purchase that just with our usual budget. I think it was maybe $30 with shipping. So that was fine. But things like a lockable AV cabinets, clamps to keep my Mac Mini from walking away, those things I'm going to have to request in next year's budget. And if I want to ever go beyond doing VHS, cassettes, flatbed scanning, and do things like 8mm film, VHS-C, and increase our capacity to digitize obsolete media, that's going to be a budget expansion request. It's going to take a lot of time. The earliest I could get more budget is July of this year. And then, of course, you have to make the purchase, have to wait for shipping. So again, all this is going to take time, not even including learning how to use the thing. So while this has all been taking time, I still wanted to further our goals and support our patrons, in the meantime. And I'll show you how in the next slide. So what we did was we created basically audio recording kits. Definitely on the cheaper end of what you can do to help support your patrons capture and record history. Our kits are themed in different ways. The most relevant one is here, the one on telling stories. And it includes several books. It includes how to book a room in our library. It has a flyer for, creating the best audio capturing environment, family story, and history questions to get you started if you're doing a family story interview. While that's not something that our patrons need to do, maybe they're just working on a memoir, or maybe their personal story is they lived in New York and not Harnett County. In there is also going to be a flyer for our upcoming audio collection called Hearing Harnett County. which is basically an effort to capture, collect, and preserve, as well as share the stories of our county that describe, activities and experiences that were typical, common, plentiful, popular in our county that might not necessarily be anymore. For example, our county has been and still pretty much is very rural. So things like tobacco farming, really popular. Our schools have changed a lot. They used to be less consolidated. Now we have a lot of consolidated high schools. So certain school rivalries don't exist anymore. So we have a lot of stories that we're losing, especially because our county is rapidly changing. We have a lot of development that's happening. And the people that understood what our county was like before, of course, they won't be around forever. So we're trying to just trying to encourage our patrons to check out these kits, find someone in the community that needs to share those stories. And once those stories have been captured, they can reach out to us and we'll work with them to see if it matches our collection needs. And then once they donate it, we'll be working with Digital NC to create a landing page for our exhibit. And that will be where our patrons can then access those Born Digital audio files. So stay tuned. We've got a lot that we're trying to accomplish, and we're still learning as we go. Next slide, please. Thank you all so very much. Of course, if you have questions, we'll be moving on to our Q&A section right now.
Thank you very much, Della. That was very interesting. I thank everybody, all the panelists, for their presentations, because when you're working with budgets and expensive equipment, you have to be creative. So appreciate everyone's ideas. So now we'll go into our Q&A questions section. So if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat. There is one in here. It says, how can Digital NC assist with hosting audio files?
I can certainly answer that question.
Okay.
Okay, well, first, I'll explain a little bit about what Digital NC is in case you have not heard of them. So Digital NC is a website. It is hosted by UNC's Digital Heritage Center. What they are is it's a location where they digitize materials, and these materials come from the community. So libraries, museums, historical societies, and so on. All of these places, churches, they have material, but not necessarily the equipment, the skills, or the time to help preserve them in a digital atmosphere. So what you would do is you would reach out to the folks at Digital NC, let them know that you have, XYZ materials and that you need help with preserving them. For audio files, what they would do is they have their own servers. So they would be able to host and hold those audio files and show them on their website and for people to access. We're doing something similar with them. We have digitized newspapers. We used to host them on our website, but they would be safer at UNC and honestly, so much more accessible than what we could create with our website. Their newspapers, each individual page has metadata on them, and they have optical character recognition. So you can do a search, like a keyword search, and it would search through the newspaper for every instance of that keyword. So they're not digitizing our newspapers. They're simply hosting those digital files. So that's what they could do to help with an audio file or something you already have that's in a digital media.
Thank you. There's another question. In Forsyth, the digitization stations have anchor users in the 2 local historical societies. Do others find specific history organizations as major users of their digitization services?
Well, here in Cumberland, we haven't had specific history organizations use our services a lot, though we have had a couple express interest. So I think it is something that could help local history societies and organizations, but we haven't seen a lot of specific foot traffic relating to that.
Are there any other questions, comments anyone wants to make? Feel free to go ahead and pop it in the chat. Here's another question. Have you encountered any copyright concerns with items that patrons have wanted to scan? I can answer that for us. We just had someone who we frequently have people that want to copy entire books, like genealogy books. We just had someone who wanted to copy like 25 pages out of a dissertation. And it's hard to explain to them about copyright. You kind of have to feel out what they want to use it for. And it's kind of, you have to kind of explain to them that it's the law and they can't just like recopy an entire book. So I don't know what anyone else's experience with that's been.
While we've not had personally had anyone request something like that, I was just thinking about at Digital NC, they have their own, I suppose, like risk analysis sort of department. So if someone wanted to, like your organization wanted to have something scanned and hosted on their website, they would do a risk analysis on whether or not that would be something that might infringe on someone's copyright. Of course, familiarizing yourself with fair use is going to be very helpful for your tool belt. So understanding what all that is can really help you when you're talking with your patrons. But also with certain digitization equipment, some of it has ways to prevent you from, let's say, taking an old VHS of a Disney movie and digitizing it. So some of this equipment is pretty smart that could help you. But that's kind of been my experience with that.
Okay, we have another question. John, did you digitize all of your vertical files or do you still have some in paper form? Oh, okay. So John replied in the chat. They still maintain physical files also as a backup, and some items have a different tangible experience compared to digital. And another question about, will this workshop be available for later access? And yes, it will be on this State Archives of North Carolina YouTube channel shortly. Any other questions before we wrap this up? Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up. Again, thank you for joining us for this installment of SHRAB's Community Archive webinar series. Thank you to Della, Joseph, and John for being on the panel. Really great information, really interesting. I'm going to reach out on some things for us to help work on some of our digitization here. A link to the recording of the webinar, as well as a feedback survey, will be emailed to all participants. So you'll be able to see recording, and we're going to ask for your feedback. So thank you everyone for attending.